In this video, we'll be covering basic free hub and bearing service for 1-1 hubs. Unlike the Hydra hubs, the 1-1 requires the cassette be removed for all free hub service. You'll notice the external seal on the free hub. Start by removing the drive side end cap. Clean out any excess grit or grime that's collected in the labyrinth seal. With your end caps out of the way, you can remove the free hub body. Simply grab the free hub body and pull it straight off the axle. With the free hub removed, you'll notice the snap ring which holds the pawls and springs in place. This is unique in the i9 lineup. The snap ring can be removed using your fingernail or a small pick. Take note of the orientation of each pawl. The pawls are directional and must be put back in the same orientation. You're ready to remove the pawls and springs for cleaning. It is not necessary to remove the springs for every service. A simple wipe down is fine in most cases. These springs are identical to those found in the Hydra. To remove or reinsert them, simply compress the loop. Wipe down all your contact surfaces with a clean rag. Make sure the pawls are free of any debris or excess grease. Be sure the pawls are in the correct orientation, with the sharpest edge of the paw facing outward. If you're using the Pro X Free Hub grease to lubricate the paw pocket, a small dab on the back of the paw works just fine. When using the oil, reinsert the paw first and put a small drop on each pivot point. Actuate each paw to make sure the oil works its way into the pocket. With your paws clean and re-lubricated, you're ready to put the snap ring back in place. Make sure the gap in the snap ring is oriented so each paw is protected. The oil seal can now be removed. With the pick inserted completely underneath the oil seal, gently pry outward. You may need to do this from a few different positions on the seal. Be sure to take care when removing the seal, as keeping it intact is critical. With the seal out of the way, you can reinsert the free hub body. Use your fingers to slightly depress the paws as you turn the driver counterclockwise. Once it's cleaned and ready to go back in, you'll need to re-lubricate the seal with Dumont-Tech Free Hub grease. Make sure the edge of the seal is fully lubricated before inserting. Simply lay the seal in its pocket around the free hub body. Using both thumbs, press down as evenly as possible. Use a small amount of grease on both outboard bearings before installing your end caps. For bearing service, start with your free hub. You'll begin with the outboard bearing on the free hub body. Use your punch to offset the spacer so you can catch the edge of the bearing. Work your way around the bearing to press it out as evenly as possible. With the outer single row bearing and the spacer out of the way, you can now remove the double row bearing. You'll need a guide to remove the inboard bearing. A socket is the easiest solution. Place the free hub paws down on the socket and use the same method to push the bearing straight out. A thin layer of grease on the outer shell of the bearing is always a good idea before pressing. You'll want to start with the inboard bearing. This is the double row. You'll need both the 152610-7 adapters for this job. Slide the press through and stage your second adapter so it meets the seat of the outboard bearing. You can now press the double row bearing. With your double row in place, you can now insert the free hub spacer and the outboard bearing. Be sure the gray seal on your single row bearing faces outboard. Stage the bearing in its seat and slide the adapter in just like the double row. With the outboard bearing pressed, make sure the spacer is captured in between the two bearings. To remove the hub shell bearings, simply use the axle to punch them free of the shell. Start with the drive side of the axle to remove the disc side bearing. Once the disc side bearing has been removed, reinsert the axle and use it to punch the drive side bearing free. To repress the hub shell bearings, you'll need your 15307 drive side and 15307 disc side bearing presses. Stage both bearings and the axle in the shell. Slide your adapters into position over the axle. Always be sure the beveled edge of the press is facing towards the bearing. With everything staged and centered, begin pressing the bearings. You'll want to drive the bearings completely into their seat. With both bearings fully seated, the axle should be firmly captured. Now you're ready to reinsert the freehub body and the oil seal. Now you're ready to remount your cassette and rotor. When servicing the front hub on your 1-1, take note of the different end caps for your disc and non-disc side. The longer end cap will always be placed on the disc side. You'll need the two 18307 adapters to repress bearings in your front hub. Take note of the beveled edge. Use your punch to offset the spacer and catch the edge of the bearing. Begin working your way around the bearing to press it out as straight as possible. Wipe your hub shell and axle clean before reinserting the new bearings. The front hub shell bearings can be pressed in either orientation. With your axle and bearings staged, insert the press so the beveled edge of the adapters is towards the bearings. Line everything up and begin pressing. With both bearings fully seated, you can grease the outboard surface and reinsert your end caps. With a newly serviced free hub and fresh bearings, you're ready to mount your wheels up and go ride.